acted on these hopes, others are seeing their hopes dashed by governments that come to power through unconstitutional means. We urge the Commission to reiterate in the strongest terms that unconstitutional changes of government constitute serious interferences with the right of every African citizen to participate in his or her own government as assured by Article 13 of the Charter. Those who don't respect constitutional processes often show no regard for human rights and dignity. Governments that doesn't respect constitution usually try to brutally stifle the voice and the will of the very people whose human and people's rights they are supposed to be protecting. The Commission has been vested with the important responsibility of protecting Africans from such attacks on their human and people's rights. This Commission has been vested with the authority to indicate that states, when they are acting inconsistently with the fundamental human and people's rights in the African Charter. Its integrity depends on its effectiveness, and its effectiveness depends on it having both the support of the member states as well as the courage and commitment to identify violations of human rights in a timely manner. The Commission has issued dozens of recommendations urging Egypt to hold the execution of people who were allegedly deprived of right to fair trial and subjected to brutality at the hands of the agents of the governments in secret detentions and prisons. The Egyptian government have ignored all these interim measures. The Egyptian government's failure to implement these recommendations is incompatible with its obligations to respect in good faith the authoritative interpretation of its obligations under the Charter. Failure to respect decisions on interim measures requested by a body entrusted by the African Union to look at cases of human rights violations seriously undermines the protection of human and people's rights. Moreover, the Egyptian government prevented our organization and other NGOs the right to participate in the Commission's public session held in Egypt last April. And there were reports that NGO representatives who did participate were allegedly harassed and intimidated. NGOs' participation to state reporting is crucial to the fairness of the assessment of countries' human rights record and is an opportunity for constructive dialogue between country assessed, the Commission, local and international society, in particular those representing victims of human rights violations. Due to the absence of independent NGOs that have been for years the voice of oppressed people in Egypt, we have no information about the recommendations made to Egypt, and we were not able to raise concerns with the Egyptian officials. We call on the Commission to remind states willing to host the Commission sessions to ensure that every organization have unhindered access to the session. Moreover, we urge the Commission to take actions when countries fail to cooperate with the Commission. Such action must be transparent and effective in holding non-cooperative states accountable to all people of Africa. When quiet diplomacy by letters and carefully phrased appeals to the government fail, the Commission must resort to more public means of condemnation and prioritize the handling of cases in any African Union language concerning such states. Africans are relying on this Commission to play its important role in defending their human and people's rights from governments who feel they can violate them without consequence. Internationallawyers.org believes, and more importantly, millions and millions of Africans believe that they can fulfill you can fulfill your responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. We now will have a pause on agenda 4, item 4, and we will come back after the tea break. Now is the time for welcoming to our proceedings representatives of the African Peer Review Mechanism who would afford us the opportunity of listening to their presentations on the State of Democracy report. You are very welcome. You have the floor. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Chair, and congratulations on your election to the chairmanship of the Bureau. And thank you for this opportunity to share with you and the delegates the findings of what we call the Africa Governance Report 2019. So I'm just going to give you a background of the rationale for the report, share with you some of its findings, particularly relating to human rights, and then also share with you what we are doing with the report going forward. Because the intention is that the production of this report becomes a regular biennial event every 2 years, that is. So basically, the African Union commissioned the report in 2017, and at that time the African Union tasked the APRM to work with the Africa Governance Architecture Platform, the AGA, to produce a report on the state of governance in Africa. And so we should see this as a complement to what the APRM does. As you're aware, the APRM conducts or assists countries in conducting what we call self-assessments of the state of their governance. And the APRM self-assessment review focuses on 4 areas: democracy and political governance, economic governance and management, corporate governance, and socio-economic development. But why the Africa Governance Report? Now, the idea, as you're aware, again, the APRM is a member organization in the sense that it's a voluntary mechanism that so far has 38 member states of the African Union. That leaves how many? That would leave about 17 that are not members. So what we wanted to do was to try and produce a report that covers the whole of Africa. A report that covers the 55 AU member states rather than just the 38 that have acceded to the APRM. And like I said, we want to do these regularly, and the idea is to select themes or areas of coverage. And again, this should be seen in the context of what the APRM is trying to do, which is to achieve universal accession, so that all the 55 member states of the African Union join the APRM, and the date is the year 2023. Now, in terms of the background, the African Union commissioned the APRM to do this in a context in which it had asked the APRM to do additional functions, to perform additional functions in addition to the voluntary country self-assessments that I've alluded to. One, the African Union tasked the APRM to monitor the state of governance in Africa on a regular basis, and it's in that context that we're talking about the Africa Governance Report. Number two, it asked the African peer review mechanism to monitor the implementation of the governance aspect of the African Union Agenda 2063 and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And the African Union also asked the APRM to contribute to the establishment of an early warning system for conflict prevention. And so, as you can imagine, this requires the APRM to work and collaborate and cooperate with other institutions, including the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. And it's in this context that the AGA platform then convened in 2018 in March to try and figure out how it would go about producing the inaugural Africa Governance report. And when the AGA platform met, it decided that the APRM Continental Secretariat would then lead the development of the Africa Governance report, of course working with the other AGA platform member, the other platform member institutions. And so at that meeting, they decided that let's have an inaugural report that covers 5 areas. 1 is transformative leadership. 2 is constitutionalism and the rule of law. 3 is peace, security, and governance. 4 is the nexus of development and governance. And 5, the role of the regional economic communities in governance. And so that began the process that then culminated in research, in stakeholder consultations, and we held consultations with the African Commission last year. We came twice, met with the Secretariat, and also with the commissioners. We had technical meetings. We then had, after we'd produced an initial report, we had the validation, and this all took place between April and December of last year. And finally, after producing the draft, it was then presented to the African Union Assembly in February of this year, 2019. And so what were our findings? And I'll just confine myself. The report, and I hope at least that the executive summary of the report has been produced, but you can also get the report from the website of the African Union and from the website of the African Peer Review Mechanism. So it contains various interesting findings and recommendations, and confining myself to human rights. The report finds that many of the member states have ratified significant human rights instruments, for example, or particularly the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. But the problem is that most states have not punctually submitted reports on the implementation of this treaty. Again, looking at the human rights situation at the national level, the report finds that various national human rights institutions lack the necessary autonomy or resources to effectively discharge their mandates. And so it calls upon member states to submit regular reports on the implementation of the Human Rights Charter. And it also calls upon member states to comply with the decisions of the Commission and the Court. It also calls upon member states to establish and resource the national human rights institutions. But so what then happens following the report? And when the African Union Assembly met in February at its 32nd ordinary session, it welcomed the Africa Governance Report. It urged member states to consider its recommendations, and the whole idea being to enhance good governance and the sharing of best practices at both country and continental levels. It also urged member states to develop national governance reports as a self-assessment tool for promoting good governance in line with the recommendations of the report. And that is where we are at this point. So what next for the Africa Governance Report? What we're trying to do is to seek enhanced cooperation and collaboration among stakeholders, which is why we are popularizing this report through processes that are consultative and inclusive, and to try to ensure that there is enhanced governance performance through collective ownership of the report, the effective sharing of best practices, and encouraging the implementation of the recommendations of the report. And so we've planned a series of activities to popularize, to launch, and to disseminate the report, which is where we are here. And we again thank the Commission for this tremendous opportunity. But also we are trying to work with member states at the country level to establish governance monitoring and reporting systems, as we also work towards the development of the next edition of the Africa Governance Report, which is scheduled for the year 2021. And so what is important, above all, is to try and encourage and work with member states to develop on a regular basis national governance report. And the idea is that we use the national governance reports as a basis for supporting the African peer review mechanism to execute that broader mandate we're talking about in terms of monitoring or assessing all aspects of governance, including the implementation of Agenda 2063 and the UN SDGs. And we also see the member states' national governance reports as resources that could be used to produce the next and subsequent editions of the Africa Governance Report. And thankfully, a practice has developed in Rwanda. And Rwanda, as many of you may be aware, produces what it calls the Rwanda Governance Scorecard, an annual assessment of the state of governance in Rwanda that uses locally conceptualized indicators, and so it's adapted to the circumstances of Rwanda. That report now is in its 6th edition, and so we are urging, and we're trying to work with the other member states of the AU to emulate what Rwanda is doing, because as you can imagine, if all member states produced an annual state of governance report, it would be very easy to get a sense of a broad picture of what is happening on a broad and accurate picture of what is happening on the continent. And that is where we are at. So the question really is, and for you to so that we can learn from you, can share with us what role ultimately can the Commission continue to play in the production, the popularization, and the dissemination of this edition of the AGR and subsequent editions as well. Thank you very much. Merci, obrigado.
Thank you, the representative of the APRM. We very much welcome this initiative of the APRM, working in collaboration with the Africa Governance Architecture platform in producing this governance assessment report. We very much, we in particular take note of and appreciate parts of the report which call on member states to cooperate with the human rights bodies of the African Union, and in particular to implement the decisions of these bodies. And of course, in this respect, I think it would be only important for us to know how far this report, for example, go in terms of highlighting the state of implementation of the decisions of these human rights bodies by member states, because the activity reports of these human rights bodies clearly indicate in one form or another issues relating to implementation of their decisions, their recommendations, their concluding observations, and that would be an important area of interest for this Commission. I don't know if any of the members of the Commission would like to have any observations on this. Should they have, I would be happy to give opportunity for one or two. I don't see anyone seeking the floor. So perhaps I think what I would say that clearly there is a convergence in this in the area of focus of this report and the work of this Commission. And the opportunity that this report presents, particularly for complementarity, synergy, and coordination between the different human rights and governance bodies of the African Union, and indeed the role that the APRM plays in coordinating and also in leveraging on the work of these human rights bodies in order to enhance the observance of good governance and democratic principles on the continent on the basis of human and people's rights. We therefore very much welcome the report, and perhaps when the next report is prepared, it should provide us further opportunities to engage not only after the production of the report, but also in the process of the development of the report. Thank you very much once again, the representative of the APRM. We look forward to the next edition of the report. Thank you. May I now call upon Commissioner Mute and the representative of Malawi, as well as the members of this the panel for that particular session on Resolution 275 of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. You are welcome. Thank you for the representative of the Republic of Malawi who requested for the this panel to be organized, and I would also like to thank Commissioner Mute, who would be, I think, who would be leading the process.
He's the moderator.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. So the panel I present this morning is on implementation of Resolution 275. So we're looking at implementation of Resolution 275, the case of Malawi. And to introduce the panel, let me begin by recalling that in 2014, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights adopted a Resolution 275, Resolution on Protection Against Violence and Other Human Rights Violations against persons on the basis of their real or imputed sexual orientation or gender identity. Now, this resolution was anchored on 4 critical considerations. First, sexual orientation and gender identity are prohibited grounds of discrimination, and all individuals are entitled to equal protection of the law in spite of their orientations or identities. So that was one of the key premises. And you could have the same discussion in respect of every individual having an entitlement to respect of their life and also having or being free from torture. So that was one of the premises. Second, the second consideration was that acts of violence, discrimination, and other human rights violations indeed do continue to be committed on individuals on account of their actual or imputed sexual orientation or gender identity. That is something which continues to happen. People continue to get killed. People continue to be attacked. What is referred to as corrective rape continues to happen. Now, the third consideration, that there have been incidences of violence and human rights violations and abuses which target these individuals, and also finally that there have been failures by law enforcement agencies to diligently investigate and prosecute perpetrators of violence. So the resolution includes 3 exhortations on states and non-state actors. First, the resolution condemns incidents of violence and other human rights violations on persons on account of their real or imputed orientation or identity. Second, it calls on states to end all acts of violence and abuse, whether committed by state or non-state actors, including by enacting and effectively applying appropriate laws prohibiting and punishing all forms of violence. And finally, it urges states to ensure that human rights defenders work in an enabling environment free of stigma, reprisals, or criminal prosecution as a result of their human rights protection work. Now, it is 5 years or more since this Resolution 275 was adopted. The panel which I lead this morning, which, as the chair said, was requested by the Republic of Malawi, aims to assess the extent to which states are implementing the measures established by the resolution towards ensuring that persons should not face death, torture, corrective rape, or other degrading treatment on account of their sexual orientation or gender identity. So now I will introduce the panelists, beginning, or panelists, and I think they'll be providing perspective, state perspective, NHRI perspective, civil society perspective. We'll also have, I guess, what we shall call an academic perspective, perhaps. And so the first speaker is the Chief State Advocate, Human Rights Section, Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs of Malawi, Mr. Pacharo Kayira, who is discussing Malawian implementation of Resolution 275 at domestic level. Welcome, sir. I'm sure you know the time you have.
Yes. Thank you very much, Commissioner Mute, and good morning to all of us. I will talk briefly within 5 minutes, highlighting how Malawi has implemented Resolution 275. I have about 4 points. The first one is that after the adoption of the resolution in 2014, the following year, 2015, Malawi underwent its second cycle review under the United Nations Universal Periodic Review. And for the first time, we accepted 2 recommendations from the Human Rights Council that related to issues of sexual orientation and gender identity. And those 2 recommendations were on the obligations to the state of Malawi to ensure that there should be no violence on the basis of sexual orientation. And then secondly, that there should be free access to health services to everyone, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Secondly, in 2017, for the first time, our cabinet discussed a cabinet paper on issues to do broadly, not only sexual orientation, but broadly to do with LGBTI. And essentially the basis of the discussion was for Malawi to take a position on how to deal with issues that arise as a result of discrimination against the LGBTI community. So when they discussed in 2017, they did not make a decision. They are still seized of the matter, but it's still positive that such an issue is being discussed at cabinet level. Number 3, in 2017, the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs requested our National Human Rights institution, which is the Human Rights Commission here, to broadly look at issues of the rights of persons on sexual orientation, or broadly the LGBTI community. And I think my colleague from the Human Rights Commission is going to give more details there. But the position taken by the ministry was essentially to address the recommendations that we received from the African Commission on our initial report, that Malawi needs to broadly look at the rights of persons in the LGBTI community. Then fourthly, we are in the process of drafting the National Human Rights Action Plan. We think it will be cleared by Cabinet very soon. And in that action plan, we have a section, apart from the usual themes which come into such a plan, like civil political rights, rights of women, rights of children. We have a section also that essentially deals with issues to do with sexual orientation and gender identity. So briefly, Chair, that's how the government of Malawi has for the past 5 years implemented Resolution 275. Thank you very much.
Before I hand over to the next panelist, can I ask you, are there particular challenges which you've encountered as you've been doing this?
Thank you. The challenges, our penal law still, to a large extent, criminalizes, prohibits same-sex relationships or acts, or what I would call homosexual acts. So, in essence, we have cases where persons have been prosecuted, although the government of Malawi issued a moratorium, I think around 2014-15, essentially asking the police not to prosecute such persons. But the prosecutions are still going on. So in essence, the law still prohibits. That's what I would call that maybe the main challenge to the LGBTI community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. I think we'll continue this discussion once we finish with all the panelists. So I cannot see him. Today my eyes are closed. So I want to invite the Director of Research, Malawi Human Rights Commission, Wycliffe Maso, who will speak to the left.
Okay.
You mean right?
To the right.
The new vice chairperson is misleading me. Okay, so who will be speaking, yes, about the role of NHRIs in implementing Resolution 275. Wycliffe, you're welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Allow me to start by stating that General Comment number 4 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the rights to redress for victims of torture and other cruel, inhumane, and degrading punishment or treatment adopted on the 25th extraordinary session of the ACPHPR in 2017 highlights the role of NHRIs on the protection of the LGBT community as follows. National human rights institutions are supposed to be involved in the prevention of human rights violations against this community through awareness-raising strategies, educational programs, cooperating with local stakeholders and CSOs, and by training their staff. Second, human rights institutions have to take advanced human rights course on sexual minority rights, which would provide more knowledge on LGBT rights. Third, they should also increase their participation in the ordinary session of the ACHPR. National human rights institutions may also lobby states to request the visit or accept requests from UN Special Procedure mandate holders so that they can also facilitate meetings between mandate holders and even the SCOs. They may also provide information on the human rights situation of their countries and also follow up on the implementation of recommendations made by the mandate holders through or in the context of the UPR review mechanism. They may also provide input into thematic research being undertaken by mandate holders, and they may appeal to mandate holders to set communications to states covering individual cases on alleged human rights violations or situations or agent situations regarding LGBT communities. They may approach states that made recommendations under the UPR process to provide technical support towards implementation of their recommendations. Having given this broad, perspective, as Malawi Human Rights Commission, guided by the broad mandate of that is provided under Section 129 to 131 of the Constitution, and even Section 30 of the Constitution that speaks to the principle of equality and non-discrimination. Basically, the Commission has cooperated very well with the civil society organizations and even the government of Malawi in implementation in the implementation of Resolution 275. In essence, basically, the Commission has increased its visibility and investigative mechanism on issues of violence regarding persons of LGBT community. From January to July, we received about 16 cases which have been, and others are still being investigated. And these cases are in the categories of cyberbullying within the transgender group, including hate speeches on social media platforms, social violence within the transgender community as well as other persons, and sexual abuse at workplaces, including sexual assaults. In the area of awareness raising, as a commission, we have worked very well with CEDEP and CHRR, where we are I can continue. Okay. I can use my phone. Don't worry. I will use my phone. Don't worry. Yeah. I was saying, in terms of awareness raising, the Commission has worked in collaboration with CDIP and CHRR, together also with government, where we have held meetings through the national reference groups to bring awareness to this technical working group and even the general public through radio programs regarding the challenges that are being met by the LGBTI refugees in Malawi. And in addition to that, as a commission, we have held meetings with the Malawi Law Society so that they are able also to understand issues regarding the LGBT community and seek their direction in as far as this is concerned. Coming to the issue of the study that government alluded to, preparations have been on course. The major challenge that we have met as a commission is that of financing the study. We are still soliciting finances so that this study is implementing. We hope that in the course of 2020, we should implement this study so that we provide the necessary advice to government as regards the way forward in as far as the LGBTI issues are concerned, and also pointing at the issues of the moratorium that was issued by the minister in 2012. Let me stop there meanwhile. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wycliffe. I think the effect of what the first two panelists are telling us is that indeed there can be, and there has been, proactive responses by the state on implementation of Resolution 275, whether it's in terms of government taking measures, beginning to explore implementation of certain recommendations, certain establishing certain policy positions, investigating to see how exactly certain aspects may be put in place, whether it's awareness raising, for example, which the Malawi Human Rights Commission is doing, and of course, critically, the fact that victims may actually file complaints to the National Human Rights Institution, and that complaints which are filed are actually dealt with. So I think then what we do next is we hear from the Center for Human Rights and Rehabilitation, CDIP, which is a Malawian NGO, and our panelist is Gift Trappens, who will provide a civil society perspective on efforts to advance implementation of Resolution 275. And I know he's on this side. So, Gift, you're welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner Mute. I think I just want to put it clear to the audience here that Malawi gives a very interesting model in terms of LGBTI issues. Excuse me. As the state advocate was saying, I'll give you a perspective in terms of where we're coming from, in terms of engaging the government, but as well sitting on the same table with the government to talk around LGBTI issues. In 2010, in Geneva, when we went for UPR, Malawi rejected all the recommendations on LGBT issues or on sexual orientation and gender identity issues. I think I just want to echo in terms of what he said, in terms of where we are coming from. But in 2015, after the Resolution 275, Malawi was able to at least accept two recommendations to address violence, but as well to make sure that our communities, the LGBT communities, are able to access health services. I think for me, I think most of the African countries don't want to talk or address violence against LGBT communities. I think for me, violence is violence, regardless of where it is coming from. I think it should be treated as violence. But I think the question is, how have we addressed or how have we engaged the government to make sure that we're speaking the same language? Where are we coming from? Where are we? I think these are the questions that I want to address. I think one of the issues that we have noted as civil society is the issue of evidence. It's the issue of documentation in terms of violence. It's the issue of bringing the stories for the government to listen that the ones who are being victimized are fellow citizens like anyone else. What we started with is to bring that narrative in terms of documenting the violations that LGBT community are facing. But the government also, or some agencies, could not trust that narrative, because if it is coming from you as an institution that are working on LGBT issues, maybe government is saying that, maybe will say that you are biased. You are already biased. So how should we change that narrative? Is for us to engage different communities. I mean, to engage different also institutions. So we started engaging the justice system in Malawi. So we started engaging with the police service. We engaged the police service in different ways, by training them, but as well by sensitizing the police service. But also we started working with the Malawi Human Rights Commission. It hasn't been an easy job because within the commission or commissioners, you find that there are other people who can also resist the issues. But we are talking about human rights issues. So we have been engaging our justice system in different ways. One, through trainings, but as well by providing evidence, documenting the violations. But not only providing that evidence, but also to refer those violations to these institutions so that they should hear the stories from the victims themselves. And that is why the Malawi Human Rights Commission is saying that we have reported, they have documented, or they are working on 16 cases. We as civil society organizations, we have been reporting these cases or referring these cases to these institutions. I think for us, the issue has always been trust in terms of the communities that would want to report these cases to these institutions. They can only trust the institutions if they are able to offer friendly services. And that is why we are able to train the Malawi Police Service, but as well we were able to sensitize the Malawi Human Rights Commission. But also we have been working with the Ministry of Justice in terms of the language, in terms of understanding each other on the issues that we are talking here. I have also to say that we have the Malawi Legal Aid Bureau that has also represented some specific LGBT cases, but that couldn't happen if we wouldn't engage each other, but as well understanding the language. As of now, we are engaging the Malawi Police Service in terms of moving beyond the workshopping, moving beyond the sensitization to make sure that we're able to institutionalize the human rights issues, specifically focusing on LGBTI issues, to change their curriculums. Whenever they are training the police officers, they are able to highlight the issues that LGBT communities are facing. So these are some of the issues that we are working with the government. But also in terms of the challenges, I have to say that the most difficult thing is a politician. When you talk with technical people, it's very easy. But when it comes to politicians, specifically towards general elections, they would want to have a popularist view because they want the vote. So they wouldn't want to go into that area in terms of legal reform. So for us, it has been a very challenging issue in terms of the legal reform. But I think the question that we are trying to struggle with is the issue of language, the issue of narrative, to go beyond the issue of same-sex marriages. So I think the language that we have also faced in Malawi is that whenever we're talking about LGBT issues, they will always reduce it to sex. but we are talking about human rights issues. We are talking about the lives of citizens of Malawi who are also voters. So for us, I think these are the issues that we have been struggling with, but as a country, we are making progress. But I think what is more important is for us to also engage other African countries to share these models. I think Malawi would be also a good example in terms of how the civil society has worked with the government, has worked with justice institutions to make sure that we are able to save the rights of all citizens equally, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. Let me stop there, Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gift. Perhaps in a sentence or two, have you experienced the challenge of religion? I know Malawi, a Christian country, but also, with a Muslim population. How have you handled that? Quite briefly, please.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's true that our country is defined as a God-fearing nation, and the issue of religion is not an issue, but I think when people are using religion to discriminate others, it's an issue. So we have been engaging religious leaders at different levels, including religious leaders who are holding high offices. I think what we have done is to create champions within the faith communities. I think we cannot talk about religious leaders without engaging them, but also bringing those stories to them. So we have made sure that we're able to have dialogue meetings between the communities and the religious leaders, because the religious leaders only listen to the affected communities whenever they are able to talk about their stories. So if you talk about religious leaders in Malawi, we still have a challenge, but I think we have made progress because we have champions who can be able to speak in support of non-discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation.
So let me then welcome Juliet Mpande, I hope that's how you pronounce your name, from AMSHA, who will be speaking to us on a regional perspective on advocacy around Resolution 275. Juliet?
Thank you so much, Commissioner Mute. And yes, it was the right pronouncement of my name. So I will speak from a regional perspective, working for AMSHA. AMSHA is a Pan-African coalition of 18 members, primarily domiciled in 15 African countries, but we have affiliates across 24 other countries, and our advocacy and initiatives actually take place in those countries. I'm also very proud to say that SEDEP, Gift Trappins, who's sitting next to me, is actually one of the founding members of the African Men for Sexual Health and Rights, amongst others. So we actually work very closely together and collaborate on a number of initiatives. So from a regional perspective, I think what we focus on is we do our advocacy on three levels. The first one is from a national perspective, because we have members in countries or partners, and we also do advocacy at the sub-regional level, which includes bodies like the Southern African Development Community and others, and we also do our advocacy at the level of the African Commission at a continental level, but also within other global human rights bodies. And so the primary basis is always around the do no harm principle, and nothing for us without us. So what we have done and what we have seen is engaging in a country is very tricky unless you allow the LGBT communities in those countries themselves to agree on an intervention. So you don't go to a country and decide what you want to do in that country. You allow communities themselves to choose. And then how we do it is the communities themselves identify what project they want to do, and if we're going to source funding, then we source the funding together as equal partners, and then we bring in and design what we call a mapping of stakeholders in the country, because we appreciate that advocacy cannot be successful in any country without having a multi-stakeholder grouping. So for example, I'll give an example of Angola, and I'm happy that the Angolan delegation is in the room. room. What we did in Angola was we were working on a project with the United UNDP, and we worked very closely with the LGBT communities themselves and policymakers at different levels. And this year we saw a culmination into the removal of punitive laws against the LGBT communities in that country. And we will not primarily take all the credit for that, but it was partly because of the work that we did with communities and policymakers in those countries. The other example that we'll give is last year at the 63rd Ordinary Session here in Banjul, we tried to engage with different state parties who are leading on a number of initiatives in the country. So the Ministry of Justice in Malawi was one of those, and SEDEP. And we also worked with the government of Eswatini that we worked with to do a customization of the police in-service manual. So Eswatini is one of those unique countries that actually have an in-service manual that is very inclusive of key populations, including men who have sex with men and other demographics, whereas other countries will shy away from that kind of initiatives. Eswatini was very influential and they took the lead in terms of saying, how do you support us to engage with this process? So last year we had a collaboration and sort of like a showcasing of states and civil society collaboration, the case of and Malawi, and we could see that there was a lot of exchange of information and knowledge in that area. On we engage primarily with sub-regional bodies like SADC, or regional bodies as they may be known. The reason is very simple. In order for us to do meaningful advocacy or to support soft changes in policy or law, there are a number of things that need to happen. We need to work with ministries of justice, ministries of health, and ministries of home affairs mostly. And usually when you use the health approach to universal access and stuff, it's very easy for countries to listen to you. So recently the Southern African Development Community just passed what we're calling a landmark SRHR strategy that is incomparable to most in the region, and it includes very progressive language. They also passed before that the key population strategy for Southern Africa that has affirming language that speaks out against, that speaks for universal access, non-discrimination and other. And that was primarily of the work that we did with the governments in that space. And then on a regional level, going back into the national level, we support our partners and members in country to do shadow reporting whenever their countries are up for review, and these are done in this space. Last year we were doing shadow reporting with Botswana and Togo, and then this year we'll see what our partners are doing, and we haven't done anything, but that's what we do. On a regional level, we support our members process, reporting at the level of the Human Rights Council and others. And so I think from AMSHA's side, we implement a model called Utetezi, which is a model that speaks about advocacy from a very Pan-African space. And there's also an understanding around the nuances of how culture and faith intersect in terms of moving forward or pushing communities backwards. Next year, in fact, this October, we're launching a project in terms of trying to understand and address the human rights violation in Senegal in particular, because that's one of the countries where we have found a rise in the incidents of violence, although there's been not that I'm aware of any documentation to that effect. And without documentation, again, it becomes almost a story that you tell to state actors. I also want to mention, in summary, that AMSHA and the Coalition of African Lesbians were actually the partners that worked together on the violence report that supported the passing of Resolution 275 at the level of the African Commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juliet. Thank you very much. So finally, final panelist is Jeffrey Ogwaro from the Center for Human Rights, I believe, and he's looking at giving research and educational efforts. So perspectives around that in respect of Resolution 275. Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Muta, our moderator, I recognize the chair of the commission and the vice chair as well. My name is Jeffrey Ogwaro. Which holds observer status here. I will not so much deal with research efforts per se because those are ongoing, but I will just mention a couple of efforts that we've made towards making clearer what is required by states and non-state. Last year, we, together with AMSHA, developed some kind of guide, a generic guide for states and non-state actors to kind of like add flesh to Resolution 25 as to how states could implement this resolution. And it was based on a number of principles that there should be non-discrimination in dealing with cases of violence against persons based on Article 2 of the African Charter, based on people's perceived or real gender identity or sexual orientation. We also based on the principle that we should do no harm responding to violence, to cases of violence against persons based on their sexual orientation. And I could give an example here where maybe an LGBT person goes to police to report a violation, and they become the ones that are the perpetrator, quote unquote, and are arrested. That's a typical example of what happens with LGBT complainants. Number 3 is due diligence in responding to violence against persons by agents acting on the state's behalf or that are under the state's effective control, and adopting necessary legislation and regulations to this effect. I think that one is a clear enough principle. And also, states have the obligation to prevent violence. I think that's a very important one. Human rights violations against persons, including dealing with the root causes of this violence, such as misconceptions about the LGBT community that are popularized by mainstream society, and stereotypes as well. And this must be dealt with irrespective of where their source is, because such misconceptions ferment the violence that we are now seeing. Also, the obligation to provide protection from reoccurrence of this violence is very important against persons that are LGBT. Another principle that we based our guide on was guaranteeing access to justice, diligently investigating and prosecuting perpetrators of violence against persons based on their sexual orientation or gender identity, and considering the rights of victims throughout the investigative and court proceedings, including their physical and psychological well-being and safety. Another very important principle, because again, a common experience with the community is that when cases are being investigated against them, their rights end up being violated more and more, even, for example, in police custody. Last but not exhaustively, provide effective remedies and, where applicable, reparations for victims. Effective in that they're implemented and that they're followed. The guide was launched here last year at a lunchtime session in plenary. Many people had gone for lunch, but Commissioner Muta helped us launch it. We will hand over more copies to the Secretariat officially. Lastly, we are currently working with NANRI to develop a toolkit for NHRIs on Resolution 275. This is still an ongoing process, and we hope that through this toolkit, there will be a better understanding by national human rights institutions in receiving cases, investigating cases of violence against persons based on their gender identity or sexual orientation. And we hope that this will be another successful initiative towards advancing the rights of sexual minorities and gender minorities in Africa. Thank you, Chair.
Much, Jeffrey. I think the key message from all the panelists is that no one really should be killed, no one should be tortured, no one should be degraded simply on gender identity. And I think listening to presentations, it's clear that there can be and there have been actions by the state sector and also the non-state sector in implementing Resolution 275. Clearly, there are huge challenges. Clearly, there are states which may still find that they have immense difficulties beginning to implement this resolution. And that indeed is the reason why a conversation such as this one is important. And I do, thank Malawi for requesting that this matter should be discussed today. Now, what we shall do is then we shall open this up for discussion, which means that we can first take my colleagues, commissioners, questions, comments. We can take comments from states, comments from NHRIs, and also from civil society or from NGOs. And for this purpose, Vice Chair, you shall be my eyes. So do we have any commissioners who wish to take the floor? States.
Yes. Wait. No state. No state. No state.
States.
No state. No state.
NHRIs.
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 No one.
NGOs.
NGO. No NGO.
NGOs.
One. We have one.
Yes.
Thank you. Speaking on behalf of HIRISA, Human Rights Institute of South Africa, we wish to acknowledge and appreciate the government of Malawi in what they're doing to implement Resolution 275. But I also want to bring to the Commission that it actually was South Africa that actually pushed for the for Resolution 275. Thank you.
No other NGOs?
You want? No.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to go first? Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Hurisa. Malawi.
All right. Thank you very much. As a way of concluding remarks, just to highlight that just like all other resolutions, recommendations from the Commission, the implementation requires collaboration amongst the many stakeholders, like the state, the human rights commissions, as well as civil society organizations. I think all the panelists have showed that for Malawi to succeed in partially implementing this resolution, it took all of us, the state, the commission, as well as civil society, to collaborate and work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. From Malawi Human Rights Commission, what we may want to say is, as a commission, we are committed to promoting and protecting rights of all Malawians, underlying all. And we do appreciate the level of collaboration that exists between government and us, and between us and the civil society organizations. And it's our prayer that as the collaboration, the level of collaboration strengthens, we should be able to promote the rights of the LGBT community also. Thank you.
Yeah, I think for me, as citizens, we should not be afraid in terms of talking the issues that are affecting our communities. What we have seen is that citizens fear their own governments as if citizens themselves are not governments. So for us, I think as civil society organizations, but as well as citizens of African countries, let us engage each other, because governments cannot be there when they are not citizens. So we as citizens, we are the government. So let us engage each other. We should not be afraid of ourselves. We should not be afraid of our own shadows. We cannot talk about human rights when we don't talk about the individuals, the citizens who are more vulnerable. So Africa, let us wake up. Let us not fear our own governments, because one day we as people, we can be presidents, we can be ministers. So let us protect the rights of African citizens. Let me stop there. Thank you.
I think my final remarks are really around to acknowledge all the states that are taking the lead in protecting their nationals in country and at regional spaces, to also acknowledge countries like South Africa that are leading in pushing this mandate, even when the mandate is so unpopular with most countries, but also to acknowledge the resilience of LGBT activists and LGBT human rights defenders and human rights defenders in general for being so bold and courageous to speak about conversations that often lead us to harm, be it physical, mental, or otherwise. And yeah, that's all for me.
Do I have your permission? All right. To make my final conclusion, I think it would be ungrateful if we didn't thank states that have taken positive steps towards making sure that their citizens who belong to the LGBT category are at least safe under the law and have equal access to the law. I would particularly like to thank countries like Angola, Mozambique, and Botswana, and Angola particularly for criminalizing discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And that, can we please popularize Resolution 275 and call out states based on this resolution of the African Commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, let me conclude in the following terms. During the last 1 year alone, we have had at least 2 senior courts in our African countries making determinations which recognize the importance, the imperative of protecting all people against human rights violations, against torture, against killing. And that is a context within which we have to understand high court decisions which have been made in Botswana. That's a context within which we have to understand high court or court of appeal decisions which have been made in Kenya. Of course, there will always be pushbacks. But I want to finish, again, thanking the panelists by recalling a statement which was made obiter by a court of appeal judge in Kenya, writing for the majority in a case which came up before our courts, Kenyan courts, this year. And the judge is speaking about Kenya, but actually he is also speaking about Africa. And he says, the issue of persons in our society who answer to the description lesbian, bisexual, gay, transsexual, intersex, and queer is rarely discussed in public. The reasons for such coyness vary, but it cannot be doubted that it is an emotive issue. It is possible for the country to close its eyes and hearts and pretend that it has no significant share of the people described as LGBTIQ. But that would be living in denial. We are no longer a closed society, but fast moving towards the open and democratic society based on human dignity, equality, equity, and freedom, which our Constitution envisages. We must therefore, as a nation, look at ourselves in the mirror. It will then become apparent that the time has come for the people's, in this case, the people's representatives, the executive, and everybody else in society, religious organizations, the media, and the general public, to engage in honest and open discussions over these human beings. And I think that's what we have been doing this morning. That's what Resolution 275 asks us and asks Africa to do in order to ensure that people do not get killed, people do not get maimed simply because of their identity or orientation. Thank you very much, and thank you so much to my panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Mute, and we also appreciate the initiative of the Republic of Malawi for this panel. Article 1 of the African Charter is the article of the Charter that outlines what the obligations of states are. Let me read it. The member states of the Organization of African Unity, of course succeeded by the African Union, parties to the present Charter, shall recognize the rights, duties, and freedoms enshrined in this Charter, and shall not just recognize, but also undertake to adopt legislative or other measures to give effect to these rights and freedoms enshrined in this Charter. The rights and freedoms enshrined in this Charter enjoin member states and impose on them the duties of respect and protecting these rights. And these duties to respect and protect these rights entail that the states use the responsibilities and authority entrusted to them by their population to protect each and every one of the member of society from being killed, from being maimed, from being excluded from the affairs of society. In committing to uphold the rights in the African Charter, this is the commitment that member states have made. And it is incumbent on this Commission to engage member states and call on them that the attack on any member of society on account of their identity is an attack on everybody, because allowing a section of the society to be attacked will open a space for another section of society to be also exposed for attack. It is therefore extremely important that we, member states, as well as all of us as citizens of the continent, that the killing, the maiming, and other forms of attacks against people on account of their real or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity is not in accord with the principles and values of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. Thank you once again to the panel. Now, we move back to agenda item 4, and we have, in this respect, a request from the Democratic Republic of the Congo to deliver their statement. You have the floor, sir. 7 minutes. Thank you.
Merci. Honorable Monsieur le Président de la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples, honorable Monsieur le Vice-président, Mesdames et Messieurs honorables commissaires, Mesdames et Messieurs les participants, en prenant la parole au nom de Son Excellence André Lite ACBA, ministre des Droits humains de la République démocratique du Congo empêché, je voudrais avant toute chose féliciter le nouveau bureau élu ce 21 octobre 2019 et lui souhaiter un fructueux mandat. Je rends hommage au fils de mon pays, je cite, l'honorable Rémy Ngoï-Lumbu, pour son élection au poste de vice-président de la Commission, et vous transmets les félicitations de son Excellence Monsieur le Président de la République, Félix Antoine Tshilombo. Mes hommages vont également à l'endroit du bureau sortant pour le travail abattu durant son mandat, dont les résultats sont incontestables, et particulièrement à l'honorable Soyata Maïga pour le travail important que vous avez abattu en tant que rapporteur pays pour l'amélioration des droits de l'homme en RDC. Monsieur le Président, je saisis aussi l'occasion qui m'est offerte pour témoigner ma gratitude au gouvernement et au peuple frère de la République de Gambie pour l'accueil chaleureux réservé à la délégation que j'ai l'honneur de conduire et à moi-même à l'occasion des travaux de la 65e session ordinaire de la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples. Monsieur le Président, il m'est agréable de m'adresser à cette 65e session pour réaffirmer l'attachement de la République démocratique du Congo à la promotion et à la protection des droits de l'homme et pour apporter des éclaircissements sur la situation réelle des droits de l'homme dans mon pays. Monsieur le Président, depuis la session de Son Excellence Monsieur le Président de la République Félix Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo à la magistrature suprême, il a fait de l'amélioration des droits de l'homme l'une des priorités. L'une de ses priorités, les violations de droits de l'homme ont connu une tendance décroissante très significative sur l'ensemble du territoire national, comme peut l'attester le Bureau conjoint des Nations Unies aux droits de l'homme au travers de ses rapports mensuels qui font référence dans les milieux des ONG. C'est ici le lieu d'annoncer que le gouvernement entend mettre sur pied, dans le plus bref délai, son propre mécanisme de monitoring sur tout l'ensemble du territoire national, dont la mission sera de disposer quotidiennement d'une cartographie réelle sur des cas de violation de droits de l'homme perpétrés dans les villes, communes et 147 territoires administratifs que compte notre pays. Ce dispositif aura à faciliter la prise en charge judiciaire adéquate pour apporter des réponses conformes à la charte, conforme à nos obligations au titre de la Charte africaine de droits de l'homme et des peuples. Monsieur le Président, abordant le thème de cette année de l'Union africaine, je cite, l'année des réfugiés, des rapatriés et des personnes déplacées pour des solutions durables aux déplacements forcés en Afrique, nous sommes tous unanimes que ces déplacements sont causés notamment par des guerres récurrentes et la mauvaise gouvernance qui rend impossible l'accès des populations aux droits fondamentaux. Le déplacement est un sujet central du gouvernement congolais de par les victimes qui en résultent. Selon les Nations Unies, le 31 décembre 2017, on a compté environ 4,5 millions de citoyens congolais qui ont fui leur habitation. Mais il y a aussi plus d'un demi-million de réfugiés en provenance des pays voisins qui ont trouvé refuge en RDC, soit 154 000 réfugiés. Et près de 580 000 réfugiés et près de 860 000 réfugiés congolais ont trouvé l'asile dans des pays voisins. Ces questions étaient au cœur d'une conférence internationale tenue à Kinshasa du 22 au 24 octobre 2019, organisé par le Comité national de Croix-Rouge, le Haut Commissariat des Nations Unies pour les réfugiés, avec l'appui du ministère de l'Intérieur et de Justice, à travers la Commission nationale pour les réfugiés et la Conférence internationale sur les régions des Grands Lacs. Monsieur le Président, la solution n'est plus dans des engagements et des bons discours, elle est plutôt dans les actions. C'est pourquoi Son Excellence, Monsieur le Président de la République, est déterminé à mettre définitivement fin à la recrudescence des groupes armés à l'est du pays, qui favorisent la commission des violations des droits de l'homme dans les déplacements forcés et rétablir la paix et la sécurité. Cette action est illustrée par sa récente visite à Bukavu et à Beni, où il a organisé des conseils de défense et de sécurité autour notamment des gouverneurs des provinces affectées par les affres des groupes armés afin d'éradiquer l'activisme dans ces régions-là. L'élimination par l'armée congolaise du leader du mouvement terroriste FDLR, Sylvestre Mudakumura, le 18 septembre dernier, marque un progrès notable dans la lutte que mènent les forces armées contre la guerre qui lui imposent les groupes terroristes qui accumulent l'est du pays. Monsieur le Président, dans le cadre de la lutte contre la pauvreté, je me dois de porter à la connaissance de la Commission que Son Excellence, Monsieur le Président de la République, a officiellement lancé le 16 octobre dernier à Kinshasa le programme accéléré de lutte contre la pauvreté et les inégalités en République démocratique du Congo. Dans ce même ordre d'idées, ici de mentionner l'effectivité de l'enseignement de base sur l'ensemble du territoire national, désormais, l'État congolais prend en charge les enseignants des écoles publiques et conventionnées. Je me dois également de signaler la décision du Premier ministre chef du gouvernement du 17 octobre 2019 interdisant la rétrocession du ministère de l'Enseignement supérieur et universitaire des quotités prélevées sur les frais d'inscription et de minerval. Cette pratique impactait négativement le fonctionnement des établissements de l'enseignement ainsi que les conditions sociales du personnel enseignant et des étudiants. Monsieur le Président, s'agissant de la participation de la femme à la vie politique, en dehors de la présidente de l'Assemblée nationale, l'honorable Janine Mabunda, sous l'impulsion du chef de l'État, le nouveau gouvernement récemment investi a veillé à une représentativité des femmes. À titre illustratif, les femmes sont représentées au gouvernement par 12 femmes, dont une vice-premier ministre, 3 ministres d'État, 4 ministres, un ministre délégué chargé des personnes vivant avec handicap et d'autres personnes vulnérables, avec cette particularité que ce ministère est dirigé par une femme vivant avec handicap en la personne de Madame Irène Issambo et 3 vice-ministres. Monsieur le Président, s'agissant des violences sexuelles, le gouvernement tient à relever les évidences suivantes qui témoignent des efforts destinés à en réduire la portée. 1. L'adoption d'un plan d'action de lutte contre les violences sexuelles par le FRDC et la police nationale congolaise PNC. 2. L'installation dans les provinces des unités spécialisées de la PNC pour la protection des enfants et la prévention des violences sexuelles. 3. La nomination pour la 2e fois consécutive d'une représentante du personnel du chef de l'État en matière de lutte contre la violence sexuelle et le recrutement d'enfants. 4.
Your time is up.
Je vais clôturer. En ce qui concerne la liberté de la presse, Son Excellence, Monsieur le Président de la République, avait déjà indiqué dans son discours d'investiture vouloir faire des médias un véritable 4e pouvoir. Et à l'occasion de la Journée mondiale de la liberté de la presse, le 3 mai dernier, à laquelle il avait pris part, un mémorandum comprenant 18 recommandations lui avait été remis et les réformes sont en cours. Monsieur le Président, au cours de la 42e session des Conseils des Nations Unies aux droits de l'homme qui s'est tenue à Genève du 9 au 27 septembre 2019, la République démocratique du Congo a reçu les recommandations issues de l'examen périodique universel. Dans cette perspective, permettez-moi de rappeler à votre auguste institution que mon pays attend toujours les observations conclusives au rapport périodique cumulé présenté au cours de la 62e session ordinaire pour continuer le travail de réforme qu'exigeront vos recommandations. Ces observations lui permettront aussi de préparer adéquatement son prochain rapport périodique conformément aux prescrits de la Charte africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples. Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Vice-président,
Thank you very much. I've given you 1 more minute. thank you again on the update that you have provided us to strengthen and enhance the presence of human rights monitoring mechanisms across the country in all the 147 administrative divisions of the DRC, including the provision of judicial services in all those administrative divisions. We also thank you for the initiative to address issues relating to the theme of the African Union for 2019 on refugees and internally displaced persons. We take note of your call for this commission to send its concluding observations to the DRC. We thank you for that. We also hope that the DRC continues to strengthen its regulatory framework relating to the extractive industries. In this respect, we do hope that it would continue to uphold the new mining code of the DRC adopted in 2018 and wouldn't in any way give in for the pressure coming from companies. Thank you very much again. It is now 11:01 and time for a health break. Thank you all for your kind attention. We will be back in 15 minutes.
Chair, don't forget that you're meeting with the ESRC.
Yep.